Right, good afternoon everybody. Thank you for coming along and giving me some of your time to hear me talk about some of my photography. So I'm Richard Peters, I'm a Nikon ambassador for wildlife, and today what I'm going to do is talk about how I look at light. So when I do my talks, if you've ever been to one before, I try to make them kind of a little bit educational, so I don't just show you picture after picture of something pretty, I kind of explain a bit about it. Today I'm going to explain about light and try and give you an idea of how to look at light when you're taking your photographs. So, the title of the talk is Seeing the Light, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to try and get you seeing the light when you take your photos. So, this is a couple of cheaters, 3 cheaters. We'll ignore the fact these 2 aren't looking at the camera, it's kind of annoying. But even if they were looking at the camera, this isn't a particularly interesting photo. It's okay, it's got a nice blurry background, which everyone likes. It's got a very interesting subject. Cheetahs are very interesting, they're very captivating. But because the light wasn't very good, the eyes are lit up with black, so there's no connection to the subject. So it's a nice subject, but it's not really a nice photo, and it's all down to the light. The light has kind of ruined the photo for me. And it's the same thing here with this lion. Lions are very nice subjects, they're great to see. If you've ever photographed them, they're amazing animals. Again, ignore the fact he's not looking at the camera, it's kind of annoying, but if he was, it's still not a particularly good photo. It was taken late in the day, the sun was setting, it was very cloudy, it's very overcast, very dark flat light, and so the picture's just got nothing interesting, there's nothing really going on. If you compare that to this photo, it's just a lion standing on the grass, which doesn't sound very exciting, but the light has just given it some impact. There's something a bit more interesting happening now because we've got this nice side light coming through the main. So it's just kind of elevated the photo and turned it into something a bit more interesting than just a lion standing in the grass. And so when I'm taking my photos, when I'm behind the camera, I do several things. So I use the average exposure that the camera gives me using matrix metering. I use manual with auto ISO for 95% of my photos. With the idea being that with manual I can select the shutter speed and the aperture because they're the creative aspects of the picture. The camera's going to deal with the ISO for me. If I do need to bias that for the lighting conditions, I use exposure compensation. Generally I expose for the brightest area of light within the frame, and then I wait for the key elements of the photo to be in the light. So that's kind of my thought process in a nutshell. So, if we place ourselves between the subject and the sun, that gives us front light, and front light kind of makes the subject stand out, and it can give you nice light in the background as well, and nice colours. It's kind of, for me, it's generally the most boring type of light to shoot in. It can produce some nice photos, it's kind of nice, you know, you get some nice colours and that kind of thing, but it's not my favourite type of light. If I can shoot in it, great, but I'm always looking for something a bit more. If you can do front light when the sun's rising or setting, then you get nice colours and it kind of elevates it a bit more. Same here with this lion, which is actually just around the side of the stage, printed big if you want to see it afterwards. So front light kind of makes you really look at the subject. It really highlights the detail. If the colour's good because the light's nice and warm, it really adds something. Here, puffing on Skomer Island, you're kind of drawn into that beak with those sand eels. So the front lit kind of has really worked nicely there for it. And the same here. With this particular photo, I kind of got a little bit lucky. Something happened that I didn't plan for. So it's a really bright kind of contrasty light, nice front light on this vulture coming in, but actually because the light was so bright, it reflected off the grass down here and then lit up the underneath of the wings there. So it's something I hadn't planned for, but it elevated the image, because without that, the wings would have been dark and it wouldn't have been such a good photo. But you've got this nice golden light there, which I completely didn't plan for, total fluke, but you know, I'll take it, it's a win. And the same here, I kind of got a bit lucky. So this was taken with the 180 to 400 with the built-in converter. This was in Yellowstone. This coyote walked past the car, maybe 7 feet away. It stared at me for about 5 seconds. The light was very harsh, but it was kind of slightly behind, so there was a bit of backlight going on, but the car was bright white, and so the light reflected off the car and lit the face up. So I had a bit of backlight and a bit of front light. I flipped the teleconverter in place quickly to get one shot, and I was kind of annoyed that I could see the car in the eyes. It was like, damn, that kind of has drawn my attention away from the eyes, away from, you know, the shot a little bit. But the problem is, if the car was black, the light wouldn't have reflected and there wouldn't have been a shot. So what do you do? But yeah, so it was a combination of front light and backlight on that one. So if you place yourself between the subject and the sun and find a dark background, that's when things start to get a little bit interesting. So just front light on its own is nice, but once you can kind of get a dark background, you can kind of start to introduce a bit more creativity into the photos. So as an example, Dalmatian pelican, Lake Kirkini in Greece. I took this photo one afternoon, and I kind of thought, yeah, it's all right. It's a bird flying. It's in nice light. You know, there's nothing special. I've clipped the wings top and bottom. You know, there's nothing particularly special. But actually, this area behind, this slope in the picture, was a mountain in the background. And what I actually noticed is, as the sun was rising, part of that mountain would stay in the shade. So you'd have all this nice light in the foreground, and you'd have this dark area of mountain in the background. And so the following day we went out, and I specifically looked for this kind of shaded area and for these birds flying past it, so that I could try and expose for the bird in this nice frontlit area, but try and get them against this dark background. So I'd follow them through the viewfinder and only take a picture when they're against the shade. And what it did was it turned the picture from this into this. And so it's added a bit more drama. There's a bit more interest going on. It's a bit more detailed, and it just looks a bit more interesting. And I applied the same technique to the birds as they would kind of bob past the boat. So we were shooting from a boat, and on this particular occasion, what I did, I waited for them to be where this mountain was reflecting in the water behind in the shade, so that's made the background go very dark. But here, I also waited for the shadow of the boat. So this area down here is darker than the main face, and that's just the shadow of the boat. So I was watching for the way the shadows were interacting as well. So I've got front light on the bird, I've got a dark background, and I'm also trying to introduce some shadow as well, just to kind of elevate the image a little bit. And what that's done is drawn your attention straight to the face, and now you really look at that face and the eye, and that's the most important thing. So it's just looking at the way that light was interacting with the subject. And the same thing here, a classic photo, a swan on the black background. And this is achieved by shooting into a shaded area. So on this particular occasion, I was shooting across a pond. On the far side of the pond were some trees. The sun was very high in the sky, so it was lighting the birds nicely, but it wasn't getting into the foliage of the trees, and so I was getting this nice dark background, and that's enabled me to kind of create this sort of shot. So if we place the subject between ourselves and the sun, that gives us backlight. Backlight is very good for silhouettes, and silhouettes are something I really like to work with. So the key to a silhouette is a strong bold shape, which gives you easy subject identification. It's because the problem here is we can't see any detail in the subject. So if you're shooting for silhouettes, you have to have a shape that tells the viewer what the subject is, and it has to be very clear, it has to be very defined, because there's no detail in the subject itself. As an example here, we know this is a red deer. It's very obvious. There's a few flies buzzing around as well. I just positioned myself for this band of light that was setting behind, so I could create a nice silhouette. This isn't a particularly good silhouette. We know it's an elephant. It's obvious it's an elephant, but the problem is you can't see his legs, or you can see a little bit of them, and it also looks like he's only got 3. So it kind of doesn't work. It's a 3-legged elephant, and you can't really see the legs. So it kind of ruins the photo. It doesn't quite work. And the same thing here. On face value, this is kind of a nice photo, 3 giraffes at sunset, or at sunrise on this occasion. But the problem is this guy on the left-hand side. He's just over the ridgeline, so his legs are cut off a bit and they're together, so it looks like he's got 2 fat legs, and you can't see below the kind of the knee line, so it doesn't quite work. So when you're working with silhouettes, it's really important. You need to see the whole shape. And especially if something's on the ridge line, you really need them to be standing on the very top of it. Otherwise, once you cut the legs off, if they're too far back, too far forward, you lose the legs, the shot doesn't really work. If we compare that to this photo, this one kind of works. So here we've got the young one who's standing on the top, so you can see his legs. The one on the far right, I've waited purposefully for it to be walking forward, so you've got that bend in the leg, so you can see it's moving. And on this occasion, a different time to the previous photo, there's also a very nice sky, and so it's really added to the image. So comparing those 2 photos, this is kind of the one that works a lot more. And the same thing here with this cheetah. So this is the first and only time so far that I've had a cheetah on a mound at sunrise when there's a nice sunrise. And so I was really excited, and I was really pleased when this opportunity arose. But I took several pictures, and something about it just didn't quite work. And I kind of thought, this is annoying, this is bugging me. And I knew what it was straight away. You can't see the tail. So it was kind of ruining the photo. Then, thankfully, as wildlife usually doesn't do, on this occasion, the cheetah played ball and its tail flicked out. And so now it's it's finished the picture off. Now it makes sense. Now you can see it's a cheetah. But actually, the most important thing in this photo is this tiny bit of light here, because this little bit of light here has turned it into a four-legged cheetah, because without that, it's a three-legged cheetah. So sometimes the smallest thing, the smallest detail is all you need to transform a silhouette into a picture that doesn't work into one that does. And just that one tiny bit of light has done that for this photo. And so here, you know, same sort of thing. So an ostrich, I really liked, it was sunset, I really liked this band of colour going across the sky, and I thought, I want to get a silhouette, and I want the top of the frame to be dark, the bottom to be dark, and I want this nice silhouette of this ostrich in this light. Now unfortunately, ostrich was quite tall, the cloud was quite low, and so I couldn't underexpose any more than this. If you view this picture on a normal computer screen, you can see there's still some detail in the grass, the sky isn't quite dark enough, but I couldn't underexpose any more. And the reason is simple, because the head was cutting into the clouds. If I underexpose more, I lose the head, the picture doesn't work. Again, this is one of those occasions where the subject then played ball. It found something on the floor it wanted to eat, started eating. I could now wait until it ducked its head down and just wait and time my shot. So now I can underexpose more. I can get the bottom and the top very, very dark. The silhouette is still there, it's still clean, we know what it is, and it's just in this nice sort of band of colour. So it's just looking at your subject. When you're working silhouettes, look at your subject, work out what you can do with it. Same thing here, little owl. I was sitting in a little owl hide. I can't move, I can't reposition myself, what can I do? So it landed on this gutter, and basically instead of just taking a picture of it on the gutter, which was a bit messy, you know, there's a roof right behind it, didn't work, I noticed in the window it was a silhouette. So this kind of area behind, this bright area, is actually the building I was in, which was lit by the sun very nicely. Owl was perched in the shade on the thing, on the guttering. So shooting its reflection in the window gave me a silhouette. So it turned a no photo situation into a situation that worked. And it works, it doesn't just work with sunrise and sunset, you can do it with kind of really nice dramatic blue light as well. So the silhouettes are really good, they're really good fun, it's really worth experimenting with them and playing around with them. So if we've got the subject between you and the sun, we get rim light. Rim light is also something I like to work with. There are two ways of approaching rim light. So the first one is this, which is the typical kind of shoot into the sun, but with the sun just out of frame. If it's sunrise or sunset, you get this nice warm tone. You kind of got the rim light going around the cheetah here. This is the same cheetah from the mound, by the way. And so this kind of picture works. It's quite nice. If we compare it to the stag shot we saw before, these are the same principle, but with the picture on the right, I'm shooting more into the sun is lower in the sky, it's warming the picture up, so it's giving me detail in the subject and that rim light. The picture on the left, the sun is a bit higher in the sky, it's a bit harsher, everything's a bit brighter, and so that's allowing me to get more of a silhouette. So very similar lighting conditions, but you can see how they can produce two totally different looks to the picture. So I do like working with rim light, but actually what I really like is rim light with a dark background. Again, this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting, because now we can do rim lit silhouettes, and that's something I really like to do. So it gives you these nice kind of outlines of the subject, there's no detail, but it's very moody because you've got this nice dark background, and it works really well. This is a hyena from the Masai Mara, and it had just come out of its den, it was in the morning, and behind it is just a ridge. It's just a simple ridge that was in the shade, but the sun was quite bright. Lots of underexposure has given me this, you know, the outline of this usually quite unphotogenic animal, but I liked all the colours coming through the fur, nice dark background, and it turned into an interesting photo. Now the trick with this is recognising when there's potential for this type of photo. So here is a red squirrel from the Cairngorms, for anyone who's been up there. This is the metered exposure, so this is what the camera thinks I want my photo to look like. But it wasn't. So I took this shot, it's the typical kind of chocolate box shot. I took it, I looked at it, I thought, it's alright, but it's not what I want. But what I noticed was this, you know, this lovely light coming through the tail and this nice rim light here, and I really liked that. So what I did was I took this frame, I then underexposed by 2.7 stops, I upped my white balance to warm the picture up, to kind of then take my next shot so that I could see what the difference was between the two. And so we go from this to this. So now it's a bit more interesting. Of the two pictures, hopefully this is the one you're more likely to remember. But it's just working with that light. It's recognizing when the light is going to give you more than one different type of picture and how you can react to it. So again, lots of underexposure with rim light, and it's really throwing that background out. We've got a little bit of light catching on the log as well, and it's just turned it into a bit more dramatic of a picture. So anyone ever been to Richmond Park to photograph the deer? Show of hands, a few of you maybe, yeah. So everyone likes to go during the rut. I'm not a huge fan of the park during that time because it's a little bit like Africa or Kenya during the migration. In the migration, you've got 50 cars surrounding a load of wildebeest trying to cross the river. In Richmond Park, you've got 50 photographers surrounding a deer because it's bellowing at sunrise in the mist. And I don't really like that. This was taken during the summer, and you had this nice rim light going through the velvet in the antlers because they look really nice at that time of year. So if this was in the winter, this shot wouldn't have worked. But earlier on in the day, it looked a bit like this. So we had lots of rain, very low light, lots and lots of rain. Still a nice picture. I still like it, but there's two very different shots there from the same day. Then later on in the afternoon, the clouds parted as the sun was coming down. About 45 minutes before sunset, the clouds parted, and so the light started to change. Now the problem here, comparing these two photos, there's quite a big difference between them. They're about 40-45 minutes apart. But the problem is, with the picture on the left, the background is too light, so the rim light doesn't really work, and the deer is in an awkward shape. So where I was saying about having those clean outlines, here your brain is trying to work out, is it a weird short deer, is it squatting, is it looking away, is it looking toward me, like what's going on? Your brain can't work out exactly what the deer is doing. It just looks a bit odd. You know it's a deer, but it just looks wrong. So it's really important when working with rim lit silhouettes and with normal silhouettes, you really want to make sure that the shape of your subject is working. And here, the difference between the two shots and the reason one is dark and one is lighter, quite simply the sun is still quite high in the sky on the left, and so the background is still lit, whereas with the shot on the right hand side, the sun is much lower in the sky, and so that's actually shadow in the background of trees in the distance, and those shadows are creeping towards the deer, and that's given the background a nice kind of dark colour that the rim light stands out against. And the same thing here again, another 180 to 400 shot, and here I just liked all the flies that were kind of buzzing around as well, so I was trying to highlight those flies. And that's a technique that works really well, and it can work with flash as well. So this is a flash shot just from my garden at home, and it's a fox in the rain. And if you kind of think a picture of a fox in the rain, what can you do with that to make it interesting? One simple light, used it as a backlight, so I could get this nice rim lit effect on the fox, and then highlight the rain that's coming down as well. And so the light has turned it into a more interesting picture than just, essentially it's just a soaking wet fox standing on my decking. It's a bit boring. But it's turned it into an interesting shot by using the light in an interesting way. So if you position the sun to one side of your subject, that gives you side light. And side light is very good for contour and depth on the subject. And so that works really nicely. It's something I like to use because you get this nice you get nice details and you get the nice shape to the subject. So it's something that works really nicely, side light. And if I have the opportunity, I quite often position myself to get that sun to one side. And what it does is, if you look at this picture of the lion here, you've kind of got all these nice ripples in the fur, and the light's just catching it. So you've got areas of shade and areas of light, and it just makes it more interesting. It gives you more to look at in the picture. Same thing here. It's just a lion looking back on itself, but that side light has kind of given you these nice tones, these nice areas of light, these nice areas of shade, and the way they interact with each other and create little ridges over the fur and on the ears and the tufts. It's really interesting. And so side light sometimes can transform your picture and turn it into something that front lit wouldn't have worked. Worked especially well on this shot. This one's really nice because we've got this leopard cub walking across the frame into the light, and the light was just perfect on the face, perfect on the chest, perfect on the front feet, and the rest of it was in shade. And so that combination has worked really well because we just look straight to the face, which is what you want. You want that eye contact, so it will look straight to the face. But we've got the whole body in there still. Luckily we've got the tail flicking up, which adds something as well. And it's just the light. It's just a leopard cub walking, but the light has turned it into something more interesting. And the same thing, not here because the clicker didn't do anything. The same thing here with this little owl. I got lucky, it was looking at me, wasn't a very interesting picture. It then looked at a magpie that was making a load of noise, and it happened to look in the direction of the setting sun. And so I've got this nice rim light around the kind of the side of the face there. So it just added something to it. And the same thing here. I really like the way the beak here is nice and lit on the top, but not on the rest of the beak, and so your eye follows that line up over to the head, down the back, and then you've got this nice light going over the wings. So that side light's really added something. So when the light is overcast, or as I like to call it, when you live in the UK, but it's really good for detail. So overcast light is really good for detail. There is a fine line. If it's too overcast and it's too dull, then it just doesn't work, like the cheetah picture we saw at the start. But if it's kind of overcast but brightish, then you get nice good detail. Otter in Scotland here, so especially this is a wet otter, so the fur is really nice and that detail has come out really well. If it was very bright, if the sun was out, this picture wouldn't have worked because the sun would have just reflected off all the water in the fur, the photo wouldn't have worked. And the same thing here, puffins. Who's ever photographed puffins? Show of hands, a few people, cool. So again, this is on the not the Farne Islands, Skomer Island, and this works really well because it was overcast, but it was kind of bright overcast, and so it's given the picture quite nice colours, and so it actually looks like the light was very warm, and it wasn't particularly warm, but it looks like it was. But if you compare that to a picture that was taken in kind of bright light, it doesn't really work. The contrast adds lots of distractions to the background, and if you kind of compare the two, you can just see a huge difference. I know the depth of field is slightly different because the distances were a little bit different, but the picture on the left is taken in bright light, the picture on the right in overcast light, and actually the one in overcast light looks like it was taken in bright light. So you can see how the camera looks at lighting very differently to how our eye looks at lighting, and so you can really manipulate that if you know what you're doing. Again, because the light is very bright, it's a black and white subject, the exposure on the bird isn't very good either, so yeah, overcast lighting is really good for shooting in, as long as it's not like really dark. So always kind of, if it's an overcast day, still go out with your cameras and still take pictures. And here again, if it was bright, if I'd taken this in bright light, we'd have lots of shadow under the wings. Overcast lighting, it's given it a nice kind of ethereal look to the picture, very soft tones, and the wing detail has come out really nicely. And same here, taken about 10 o'clock in the morning in Kenya, very bright light usually, but it was overcast, and so it enabled me to get all this nice texture in the elephant, and that wouldn't have been possible if the sun was out and wasn't behind clouds. So what about if we remove colour from the light and we do some black and white? So black and white is good because it's a little bit forgiving. So all these types of lighting you can shoot in, but black and white can be forgiving and it can enhance the picture. So as an example, here's a shot I took in overcast, rainy conditions, which I liked a lot. I converted it to black and white and it added some drama, so it really helped the texture in the fur stand out. Just by a quick demonstration, a show of hands if you prefer the colour version. Ooh, show of hands if you prefer the black and white version, and a show of hands if you just think it's rubbish. Brilliant, no one. It's really worth playing with black and white because you just don't know what you're going to get. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. On this occasion it worked quite well, as most of you seem to agree. But it's also very good. So here the light was quite harsh, you could see from the shadows. Turning it to black and white has kind of hidden that, because black and white is all about the contrast between light and dark. So it's kind of hidden the fact that the light wasn't ideal, but it's got rid of the gore as well. So there's a lot of red in this picture. And for some reason, not everyone likes pictures of animals being eaten, don't know why, but they don't. And so converting to black and white has kind of removed that. So obviously we still know what's going on, but not seeing blood kind of makes it a bit more tolerable. So black and white is very good for doing that as well. And here again, overcast light, brilliant for detail. So anything with lots of detail, especially a subject that's dark, really works well with low light and turning it to black and white. And this was taken on very harsh light. This was about 10 o'clock in the morning, maybe even 11 o'clock in the morning. And the light was very bright, it's very harsh. Converting it to black and white has kind of hidden that a bit, and it's kind of, the impact is still there because that contrast between black and white works. In colour it didn't work so well. Turn it to black and white and it's turned it into a good shot. For anyone thinking where's the wildlife in there, there is a bald eagle there. Again, a very grey sky on this particular occasion, so I shot it as a silhouette, converted it to black and white, just blown the sky out, turned it white, so now it's just white on black, and so now the picture's very graphic. It's just about these lines going across and this tower that this eagle is sitting on. So the most important thing when you're working with light is it can take time, okay? So you can't just think to yourself, I'm going to go out today and I'm going to take a really good picture at sunset, because there might not be a good sunset, and if there is, there might not be a subject. So here's a picture that took 4 weeks to take, so it was kind of easy-ish. I say easy-ish. I used a camera trap. I put it in an old farmhouse where we knew little owls were perching in this window, and I left the camera there for a month. So kind of easy photography because I just went home, but I had to pre-visualize and set the camera up and set the exposure for how I hoped the light would be when I hoped the owl would be there. And after a month I got one photo, and that was this one. Sunrise, little owl. So it kind of worked. Months worth of, well, I say work, again I just went home, but I set it up, and after a month I got one picture. Compare that to this photo, which I took maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and improving on this picture only happened really last year. So my best version of this picture I only took last year. So this is a picture now that we're going to see that's 5 years in the making instead of a month. So I took this a few years back, Skomer Island, for anyone who's been there, it's the Wick, and I really liked it. I like the idea of it, I should say. I didn't particularly like this photo, but I liked the idea of it. I wanted to show the Wick at sunset, nice colours, puffins, wide angle. I thought it'd be great. So I took this, and that was my best shot at the time. Now the problem is I go to Skomer Island once or twice a year for 1 or 2 days each time. So if the light's not good, I can't do anything. I can only do what the light's going to give me. And so over the years I've always got this shot in my mind. So if I can, I try to improve on it. 2 years ago, I was really frustrated. So I took this picture just to annoy myself, because I had the bird exactly where I wanted it. I had my wide angle lens. The sky was rubbish. I was really annoyed. It's not even straight. I literally just put the camera, I didn't even look through the viewfinder. Like I took it as a reminder that I almost had the opportunity. So I got this shot, was annoyed, clouds not very good, and all day it had been cloudy like this, so all day long. And it was just getting duller and duller. As the evening wore on, it was getting duller and duller and duller. And it was our last day, it was our last evening. Most of the group decided, look, the light's rubbish, let's pack up, let's go home, let's go back to the accommodation, and we'll call it quits. I said to a couple of people, let's just stay, because we don't know what will happen. Yes, the chances are the light is rubbish, it will get worse, nothing's going to happen, but let's just, until we know the sun has set, let's see what happens. So most of the group went back to the accommodation, a couple of people stayed with me. Just as the sun must have gone below the horizon, there must have been a break in the clouds that we couldn't see behind the headland, and the sky just lit up. And so we got a shot. We didn't know this was going to happen, we had no idea, but we waited and we were rewarded. So I've used an off-camera flash to light the foreground, because otherwise it would just be black, so it's just to balance the sky. And so we went back to the accommodation, all looking very smug with ourselves, the people who had gone home early. One guy grabbed his camera to run back out. He was like, nope, it's gone, you've missed it, sorry, And so it was a good lesson that, until you know there's no more light, there might be more light. And so I took this. For those of you who were here maybe last year and heard me talk, I showed this picture, and I said that I was going to go back in the summer last year and see if I could improve on it. And I did go back in the summer last year, and I think I've improved it, so now the picture currently looks like this. So this is now my kind of current favourite wide angle puffin at Skomer Island. So this was, this is 4 or 5 years after my original attempt at taking it. So, lighting has beaten me every year until finally last year it all came together. And the same thing with puffins flying as well. Anyone try to photograph them flying? Show of hands, yep. Anyone think it's easy? Show of hands, nope, good. It's really hard and it's really annoying. And this was my best attempt a very long time ago. It was my best attempt. But the light's not very good. It's a bit boring, it's a bit flat. And so over time, every time I go back, I try to improve on it if I can. We saw this one earlier, front lit with a dark background so you can see the colour in the beak. So I'm always looking at ways in which I can try and improve on my pictures. Then we had very low light, and so I played with slow shutter speeds. And this, now it's kind of getting a bit interesting, because I liked the blur in the wings, and I thought that's kind of cool, I like that. But still, it's the light for me. I like light. This is what I like this kind of stuff. So what I needed to do was combine the light on the right with the idea of the picture on the left. And again, I needed the perfect lighting conditions to do that. And again, when I'm at Skomer Island, if the light's not right, the light's not right, and what can I do? About 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, finally I could see the potential for these two pictures to come together. I had the perfect lighting conditions, and I was really excited. So I got the shot. I took it. It was rubbish, but I took it. We can see why it's rubbish. I don't need to explain, hopefully. But I persisted a lot. Hands up if you've ever focused on the background and not the subject. And if you don't all put your hands up, you're all liars. Yeah. But it happens, right? It happens, and it's annoying. But I'm persistent, and I thought, well, if I'm going to fail properly, so I failed 300 times. That's not all 300 pictures, a bit of artistic license, I deleted most of them. But I only concentrated on a very narrow part of the sky where the birds were in this light against this background, because I knew the light was going to fade quick, so I needed to just repetition. I ignored all the birds everywhere else, and finally it all came together and I got one frame that kind of combines the lighting and everything I was going for. And if you compare those two pictures, hands up if you prefer the picture on the left. Thank God for that. Hands up if you prefer the picture on the right. Thank you. And it's the light. It's all really the light. The only difference between those two pictures ultimately is the light and the way I've exposed for it, because they're both just puffins flying. That's all they are. Then you get other times where the light is amazing and there's no subject. Again, like the photo I showed you of the puffin that I took to annoy myself, I took this photo also to annoy myself, because 5 minutes earlier there was a bear standing there, but the sun was behind cloud, and so the light was rubbish. The bear walked off, the clouds parted, the sun came out, and it was quite literally the most intense colour I've ever seen. And I was really annoyed because there was a bear there 5 minutes ago. And so I went against all of my principles. I took this picture and I just thought, do you know what? I'm going to see if I can get away with photoshopping a bear into this picture. I know, right? Turns out I'm rubbish at Photoshop. So it didn't really work. But you get the idea. Sometimes the light's great and the subject's just not there. And what can you do? And it happens more often than not, which is really frustrating. Another smiley face there, that's to cover the modesty of this chap, because he was happy it was the morning. So if you imagine that speaker is a tree, so the baboons were in the tree, we saw them, we waited, they came down, there was a load of water to the right hand side, they came around the back of this kind of lake, and they came across this kind of this path here, and we thought they're going to walk towards us. The light is kind of nice, it's side lights, we're going to get these nice side light head-on shots of these baboons walking towards us, but they just stopped here, they just stopped and that was it, they didn't come any closer. So this is a 400mm, you can see sort of how far away they were. So it's kind of annoying. So I said to the driver, look, let's go down this side, because down here there's grass, there's no water, and let's see if we can shoot back that way. So let's react to what the light is doing, let's use it in a way that we hadn't originally thought to do. And that gave us some nice silhouettes. So we were able to recover the situation by reacting to the position of the light. I wanted side light, I ended up with silhouettes instead. I really like this one because it looks like he's saying, I once fought a lion this big. But the thing that works here really well with this picture, apart from the fact it's got some comic value to it, again, this little bit of light just on the knee there that kind of shows you the shape of the knee being bent. And without that, again, it just wouldn't quite work. So it's those little things that often really pull a picture together. So we saw this one earlier, and it's here again because I want to compare it to this one. So you may or may not have seen this photo before. Now, the thing with these two pictures is the camera, they were taken maybe 4 months apart, 5 months apart. They're both in my garden. The camera on the picture on the left is on a tripod. On the right, it's on the ground, but they're both in exactly the same part of the garden, facing in exactly the same direction. They've both got one flash. Both use one flash, and I've exposed for the ambient light. So the only difference between those two pictures, essentially, is the way I've exposed for the lighting. So the picture on the left, I've used a flash pointing towards the wall to try and get a shadow, and I've done a 30-second exposure to bring in all of that ambient light. So I've got stars in the sky, we can see the houses. The picture on the right hand side, we've got one flash looking back at the camera to give me the rim light, so I can see the rain, I can see the outline, and I've done a 200th of a second so that there's no ambient light recorded. So the difference is very striking, so you can see how exposing for lighting in different ways can give you two totally different pictures, even if you're shooting from exactly the same position. So it's really important. Light really just does make or break a photo, and it gives you so many different opportunities to work with. Again, this is just a straight out of camera picture, so it's not straight, there's a dust spot on it, but this leopard, what it would do, it would come out of the bushes, and it would walk maybe 10 yards, it would go back into the bushes, disappear, reappear further along, walk along, go back into the bushes, so on and so forth. And so what we were doing is we would try and drive ahead of it and hope that it would come out in front of us and walk straight towards us. So this game of cat and mouse was going on. And as it did that, I noticed that the light was getting better and better because it was the morning. And so you started to get this nice light coming through the trees. And so what I did is I set my exposure for the light. As I was saying at the beginning, I knew that the light was the most important thing. So I've set my exposure just for what the light is doing. And I took this as a test shot, so the leopard looks a little bit dark. If I'd shot it brighter, so I've artificially increased the exposure here, now the leopard looks good, but we've lost all the highlights in the background. We can't see the whiskers, and whiskers are really important with leopards. They're a really important part of them. And so I knew that what I had to do was set the exposure for the light and just hope that the leopard would walk through it. At some point, the leopard would walk through and it would combine the light and the exposure and it would all come together. If it wouldn't happen, I wouldn't get the shot, but I had the idea of what the picture needed to look like, so I set the camera beforehand so that I could just concentrate on following the leopard and hope it would walk into the light. And eventually it did, and so it kind of gave me the shot I wanted. So now I've got the nice whiskers coming up with all the backlighting, and so it's a really good example of seeing when there's potential for a photo and setting the camera for the light and just hoping it works. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you end up without taking a photo, but if it comes together, instead of chasing your exposure with the camera all the time, oh it's in the light, oh it's in the shade, chasing it all the time, setting your exposures constantly, pre-visualizing the shot and what you want the light to do is often the best way of getting the photo. And it doesn't just work with amazing animals in Africa, it works with anything. Pigeons, right? Hands up if you ever photographed pigeons. Oh, more people today than ever before, amazing. So pigeons can be really photogenic. I think there is no such thing as an unphotogenic subject. There's just bad light or not the right light. With pigeons, you know, you can take them on the ground. Yeah, a portrait, it's kind of boring, it's not very exciting, makes the pigeon look kind of boring. But introduce some nice light and it kind of gets a bit more interesting. So now it's a bit more dramatic, there's something going on. You know, even just a simple portrait, just watching what the light's doing. Here, it was just on my bird table in the garden, and this is the shadow of the house creeping up as the sun's setting. The back of the garden was dark, and so I just waited until the sun was almost cutting its neck off there and took the shot. So it was a bit more interesting than having it all fully lit there, because then it almost just looks like a cutout of a pigeon on a black background. So I wanted that kind of contour and texture of where the light and the shade kind of meet together. You know, and again, working with rim light. It's just a simple pigeon on my shed roof, but I'm just taking a picture of it, looking back at the house and shooting against the shade, against the roof of my house, which is in shade, and it's giving me that nice dark background. So even the humble pigeon can be made to look kind of interesting. And that kind of all culminates with this photo really. So this is using a slow shutter speed to kind of blur the motion of the wings, and using a flash at the end of the exposure to then freeze the motion of the head to kind of get that blurry, sharp kind of combination together. And if we compare that to the cheetah at the start, now I'm hoping I'm not setting myself up for an epic failure here. Who prefers or would prefer to have the picture on the left over the picture on the right? And who would prefer to have the picture on the right over the picture on the left? Ooh, a couple of you, cool. So there's no right or wrong answer, but the difference between those two pictures essentially is the lighting. On the right hand side, it's just a couple of cheetahs standing around and you can't see the eyes. On the left hand side, it's a boring subject made to look interesting, and that's all ultimately just down to the light. So it's really important, just observe what the light's doing, react to your situation, move if you can. If you can't, just see how the light falls on the subject, how the shade falls on the subject is also important. And it's going to help transform your pictures. Don't just think there's a subject, click, think there's the subject, right, what's the light doing, what can I do now? And on that kind of note, thanks very much for watching, hope you enjoyed.